I asked Jesus how to be sure I'm not going to hell, and what he told me will completely change how you think about eternity. Most people spend their entire lives missing this truth, constantly worrying about their eternal fate, trapped in fear that keeps them from living fully. I never expected to have this conversation, especially given my background in engineering and science. But what I'm about to share with you isn't just theory. It's something that happened to me, and it will transform how you understand salvation. It happened 3 months ago. I was alone in my office at SpaceX, reviewing the latest Starship engine diagnostics until well past midnight. Everyone had gone home, and the building had that eerie stillness that comes when machines are powered down. I remember rubbing my eyes, exhausted from staring at simulations and wondering if we'd ever truly make Mars habitable. That's when the air in the room changed, becoming thicker somehow, charged with something I couldn't explain. I felt it before I saw anything, a presence that made the hair on my arm stand up, not threatening, but overwhelming, like standing at the edge of the ocean for the first time. I've launched rockets into space, built electric vehicles that changed transportation forever, but nothing prepared me for what was happening. My analytical mind immediately tried to rationalize it. Maybe I was just sleep deprived. Maybe it was stress from the upcoming investor meeting. But deep down, I knew this was something entirely different. The light started as a pinpoint like a distant star, then expanded until it filled the corner of my office. It wasn't just brightness. It had texture, like liquid gold, but alive somehow. I couldn't look directly at it. Not because it hurt my eyes, but because it felt too personal, too revealing. And that's when the strangest thought hit me. I was utterly exposed. Every calculation I'd ever made about my life, suddenly visible and inadequate. My entire life, I've approached problems with logic and first principles thinking. When I founded Tesla, people said electric cars couldn't compete. When I started SpaceX, they said private companies couldn't reach orbit. I've always believed that with enough intelligence and determination, any problem can be solved. But sitting there facing this presence, I realized all my accomplishments were meaningless in answering my deepest question. Was I good enough to avoid eternal punishment? This question had haunted me since childhood. Despite all the success, despite changing multiple industries, despite working to preserve consciousness and make life multiplanetary, a quiet fear always lingered in the background. What if none of it mattered in the eternal calculus? What if I had achieved everything I set out to do, but still fell short in the one metric that ultimately counted? This thought terrified me more than any rocket explosion or company bankruptcy ever could. I didn't speak out loud, but I thought the question clearly. How can I be sure I'm not going to hell? I expected judgment or condemnation. Instead, I felt something completely unexpected. Laughter, not mocking or dismissive, but warm. And knowing, like someone who's been waiting years to clear up a simple misunderstanding. The feeling that came over me was like discovering a fundamental equation that makes perfect sense once you see it. A feeling I've experienced when solving complex engineering problems. The presence seemed to envelop me then, not with words exactly, but with understanding that translated itself into thoughts in my mind. He helped me realize I'd been viewing the entire question from a flawed framework, like an engineer trying to build a quantum computer with stone tools. My question assumed salvation was a transaction, a cosmic balance sheet where my accomplishments had to outweigh my failures. But that framework was completely wrong. This realization hit me harder than any failure I'd ever experienced. As the CEO of multiple companies pushing innovation forward, I've always thought in terms of performance metrics and achievement. Even my philanthropy had an underlying calculation to it, how to maximize positive impact with available resources. But the presence made me understand that I'd been applying engineers' logic to a reality that operates on entirely different principles. I was trying to earn something that was never meant to be earned in the first place. The encounter intensified, and I felt myself being shown my own heart with perfect clarity. Every moment where I had chosen ego over compassion, every decision made from fear rather than love, every time I had used people as means to my ends rather than seeing their inherent worth, all of it exposed, not to shame me, but to help me understand something crucial about my existence and what was actually holding me back from peace. And here's what surprised me most. Alongside my failures, I also saw every moment of genuine kindness, every time I'd acted from authentic care rather than calculation. These moments weren't being tallied up against the failures in some cosmic accounting system. Instead, they were being shown to me as glimpses of what true life feels like, moments where I'd accidentally stumbled into alignment with how reality is actually structured. This might sound strange, coming from someone who spent their career advancing technology and science, but in that moment, I understood that the universe fundamentally runs on love, not achievement. And I don't mean that in some vague greeting card way. I mean it operates on a specific frequency of selfless connection that's as real as gravity or electromagnetism, just harder for our limited consciousness to perceive and measure. By the way, I'm curious. Drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. It's incredible to think we're having this conversation across different time zones and continents. Anyway, back to what I was sharing with you. The presence showed me how I'd been living with a fundamental category error, mistaking the nature of existence itself. I've been treating life like a game to win, a test to pass, a market to dominate, but it's actually a relationship to enter, a gift to receive, a dance to join. The difference between these frameworks isn't just philosophical, it's the difference between constant anxiety and genuine peace, between isolation and connection, between fear and love. I felt myself being shown something even more specific than how my drive for achievement had been fueled by a deep fear of worthlessness. Every rocket launched, every car manufactured, every tunnel dug was partly an attempt to prove my value, to justify my existence. The presence wasn't condemning this, rather with overwhelming tenderness, he was showing me how unnecessary all that striving had been from the beginning. You have to understand, I've spent my entire adult life pursuing goals that others called impossible. When we were developing the first Tesla Roadster, automotive experts said electric vehicles would never be viable. When SpaceX was struggling to reach orbit, aerospace veterans predicted certain failure. I've built my identity on proving conventional wisdom wrong. But here I was facing the revelation that I'd been wrong about something far more fundamental than rocket science. The presence helped me understand that hell isn't primarily a place of punishment, but the natural consequence of insisting on separation, choosing isolation over connection, control over surrender, achievement over love. And this separation isn't imposed from outside. It's self-chosen moment by moment through how we orient ourselves toward life. I could feel the truth of this in my body, not just intellectually, but viscerally. My engineering mind immediately tried to systemize this insight, to turn it into a formula I could apply. If hell is separation, then surely salvation means perfectly executing connection in every moment. But the presence gently corrected this thinking too, showing me that this wasn't another performance metric to master. It was an invitation to rest in a love that already encompasses everything, including my failures and limitations. That's when I felt myself being shown something even more profound. The anxiety about hell that had followed me since childhood, that wasn't coming from God or the universe or whatever you want to call ultimate reality. It was coming from my own inability to accept love without feeling I had to earn it. My fear of eternal punishment was actually a projection of my own inner judge, the part of me that never felt good enough. As the CEO of Tesla and SpaceX, I've developed a reputation for demanding excellence, sometimes pushing people and systems to their breaking point. But the presence showed me how this drive has often been a displacement of my own inner critic, the voice that has never let me rest or feel satisfied with any achievement. This voice isn't reality, it's a distortion, a misunderstanding of how existence actually works. I suddenly remembered something from my childhood, a moment when I was about 8 years old, sitting in Sunday school, hearing about salvation for the first time. The teacher had explained that we needed to accept Jesus to avoid hell. And I remember raising my hand and asking, but how do we know if we've accepted him enough? The teacher couldn't give me a satisfying answer, and that question had haunted me ever since. Now in my office, surrounded by this presence, I was finally getting my answer. The question itself was based on a fundamental misunderstanding. Salvation isn't about meeting a threshold of belief or acceptance. It's about recognizing a reality that's already true, that we are loved beyond measure, not for what we do, but simply because we exist. My entire framework had been wrong from the beginning. The presence helped me understand that the great tragedy isn't that people go to hell for not believing the right things. The tragedy is that we create our own hell by refusing to believe we're worthy of love just as we are. We turn away from the light, not because we're pushed, but because we've become so accustomed to darkness that light feels painful and exposing. This is why so many accomplished people, billionaires, celebrities, world leaders, still feel empty. No external achievement can fill the void created by the belief that we're fundamentally unworthy. I should know. I've created multiple billion-dollar companies, revolutionized entire industries, and still found myself lying awake at night, wondering if I was going to hell, if all my work would ultimately count for nothing. The presence then showed me how this fear had actually been the hidden driver behind much of my ambition. Yes, I genuinely want to make life multiplanetary, to preserve consciousness, to transition humanity to sustainable energy. But beneath those noble goals was a child still trying to prove his worth, still trying to earn what was freely given from the beginning. And in seeing this, I felt an overwhelming compassion for myself and for all of humanity. The experience deepened, and I felt myself being guided beyond intellectual understanding into direct knowing. The presence showed me how the entire concept of earning salvation fundamentally misunderstands the nature of love. It would be like a fish trying to earn water, or a bird trying to earn air. These elements aren't rewards for good behavior. They're the natural environment in which these creatures live and move and have their being. Similarly, divine love isn't something to be earned. It's the medium in which we exist, the foundation of reality itself. Our problem isn't that we need to somehow qualify for this love. It's that we've trained ourselves not to perceive it. We've developed spiritual cataracts that blind us to what's always been right in front of us. And these cataracts are made of fear, shame, and the belief that we must earn what's freely given. As someone who spent my career creating and leading companies like Tesla and SpaceX, I understand the value of metrics, thresholds, and measurable achievements. There's a certain security in knowing exactly where you stand. But the presence showed me that applying this mindset to salvation is like trying to measure love with a ruler. It's the wrong tool for the wrong dimension of reality. I felt myself being shown a deeper truth about the nature of faith itself. It's not intellectual assent to doctrinal statements. It's not even belief in the existence of certain historical events or divine persons. At its core, faith is simply the willingness to trust that you are loved, to live from that reality, rather than constantly trying to earn or prove your worth. It's surrender, not achievement. And in that moment, a memory surfaced, one I hadn't thought about in decades. When I was very young, maybe 4 or 5, before all the academic pressure and expectations, I remember feeling completely at peace, completely at home in the universe. There was no sense of needing to prove anything or earn anything. I simply existed, and that was enough. And that wasn't childish ignorance. It was wisdom I had since forgotten. The presence showed me that this childhood experience wasn't just a developmental phase. It was a glimpse of reality, as it actually is, a reality where I am loved not for what I do, but simply because I exist. And the spiritual journey isn't about earning something new. It's about returning to this fundamental truth that I once knew intuitively before the world convinced me otherwise. This understanding hit me with the force of revelation. All these years building companies, developing technologies, pushing boundaries, valuable work, yes. But none of it necessary to justify my existence or secure my eternal fate. I realized I'd been asking the wrong question entirely. Not how can I be sure I'm not going to hell, but how can I recognize the love that's already here, already surrounding me? The presence then showed me something even more surprising, that this isn't just about individual salvation. It's about how we structure society itself. When we operate from the belief that worth must be earned, we create systems that rank, judge, and exclude. We build economies that treat human beings as assets with variable value rather than inherently precious. Regardless of productivity, we've institutionalized our spiritual confusion. I've often spoken about how technology can solve humanity's biggest problems: clean energy, multiplanetary existence, artificial intelligence, and I still believe in the importance of this work. But the presence helped me see that technology alone can never address our deepest need, the need to know we are loved unconditionally and to extend that same love to others. No Mars colony, or sustainable power grid can substitute for this. Then the presence showed me something that made me deeply uncomfortable. How my fear of hell, my anxiety about eternal rejection, had sometimes led me to treat others as means to my ends, rather than ends in themselves. In trying to secure my own salvation through achievement, I had occasionally trampled on the inherent dignity of others, not intentionally, but as a byproduct of my own spiritual confusion. I saw meetings where I'd been unnecessarily harsh with engineers at Tesla or SpaceX, times when I'd pushed people beyond their limits, not just for the mission, but to satisfy my own driven nature. I saw relationships I'd neglected while pursuing the next breakthrough or milestone. The presence wasn't condemning these actions, but showing me their root cause, my own fear and insecurity about my ultimate worth. And then came a wave of understanding, so profound it nearly brought me to my knees. The presence helped me see that my fear of hell was itself a kind of hell, a self-created separation from the love that's always been available to me. My anxiety about eternal rejection was creating the very experience I feared most, not in some future afterlife, but right here and now, in this life. This is the great irony that so many of us miss. By obsessing over whether we'll experience separation from love after death, we create that very separation during life. We're so busy trying to earn future salvation that we miss the salvation that's available in each present moment. The experience of being fully alive, fully connected, fully embraced by a love that never lets go. The presence then shifted its focus, and I felt myself being shown not just my fear, but a deeper wound beneath it, a profound sense of shame that had followed me since childhood. Not just guilt over specific actions, but a pervasive sense that something about me was fundamentally flawed or defective. This shame had been the engine driving much of my achievement, my need to prove myself through external success. I saw with perfect clarity how this shame had been formed through early experiences of conditional approval, through academic environments that valued performance over personhood, through relationships where love seemed contingent on achievement. None of this was anyone's fault. It was simply the unconscious passing down of a spiritual misunderstanding that's plagued humanity for millennia. And in seeing the roots of this shame, I felt an overwhelming compassion rise within me, not just for myself, but for everyone caught in the same misunderstanding. All the driven entrepreneurs and executives I've worked with at Tesla and SpaceX, all the brilliant engineers pushing themselves to exhaustion, all the ordinary people working jobs they hate to prove their worth through productivity. We're all responding to the same fundamental wound. The presence then showed me how this wound affects not just individuals, but entire civilizations, our economic systems, our political structures, our social hierarchies, all of them shaped by the collective belief that worth must be earned, that love is conditional, that acceptance must be achieved rather than received. No wonder we're exhausted, anxious, and divided. We've built our world on a spiritual misunderstanding. I felt a sudden clarity about why my work with sustainable energy and space exploration matters, but not in the way I'd previously thought. It's not about proving our worth as a species or earning our cosmic keep. It's about expressing the love that's already within us, about creating systems that reflect rather than contradict the unconditional nature of divine love. Tesla isn't about earning salvation. It's about expressing gratitude. The Starship program we're developing at SpaceX, making humanity multiplanetary. It matters deeply, but not as cosmic life insurance. It matters as an expression of the extraordinary creativity and care that flows naturally when we recognize our inherent worth and live from that reality. Mars colonization isn't about escaping Earth. It's about extending the reach of conscious love into the cosmos. The presence then showed me how differently I would lead if I truly lived from this understanding. Instead of driving people from fear, I would invite them from love. Instead of pushing for perfectionism, I would create space for wholeness. I would still pursue excellence, still expect dedication to the mission, but the energy behind it would be completely different. Not frantic proving, but joyful expressing. And I saw with startling clarity that this shift wouldn't make me less effective as a leader. It would make me more effective. Cruise people don't do their best work from fear and pressure. They do their best work when they feel secure, valued, and connected to something larger than themselves. My drive for perfection hadn't been the source of my success. It had been a limitation I'd succeeded despite. Not because of. The presence showed me how this understanding changes everything about how we approach ethics and morality. It wasn't just a poetic sentiment or a simplification for the masses. It was a precise description of how reality actually works. When we live from the experiential knowledge that we are loved unconditionally, right action flows naturally. We don't need elaborate moral codes, because love itself guides us more precisely than any external rule could.